As we discussed in our last workshop too, with grief, and it has so many different faces, right? You probably heard this in your small group too. There's so many different feelings that come up when we talk about climate distress. And right, it's not just anxiety and sadness. It's like horror, rage, worry, fear, sometimes positive emotions, all of those. And grief and love come together, right? Sadness and fear come together. And so I just want to say that in this workshop today, when I talk about grief, I really mean like the whole complexity of your whole internal experience, right? I'm not just saying grief as sadness, but I'll be using this word a little bit more often, but just know when I say it that it means all of it, whatever there is for you, right? And so we're going to move into some of Francis Weller's work right now. And so if we think about over the course of our life, grief really enters our hearts in many different ways, right? And if we acknowledge and tend to our grief, it's also important to become familiar with what he calls the 5 gates of grief. I want to share my screen again. Let's see. There you go. There you go. So the 5 gates of grief, and each of those doorways leads, they lead into, Francis Weller calls it like the communal hall of grief, right? And each of these gates helps us to understand the many ways that loss touches our hearts and our souls in our life. And I think we're very familiar normally with the first gate of grief, which is everything we love, we will lose, right? This first gate really speaks to the reality of impermanence, right? Nothing lasts forever. I can't do nothing to change that, right? There's no possibility for something to continue forever. And so the greater the sorrow, it's almost like the more I love, the bigger I love, the greater my grief is going to be in the face of loss. And illness falls in this too, in this gate, right? Like any lingering illness can activate feelings of loss, right? Sometimes it's like the longing for the vitality that we once enjoyed in our bodies. And sometimes we can even feel a sense of betrayal of our own body, right? And part of the tension with the sorrow has to do with realizing that we're really not meant to go back. And then the second gate, the places that have not known love, right? It really speaks to the shame, the trauma, the regrets, the childhood sufferings, like the turning away from part of us because of the perception that I'm not good enough and I'm not enough and I'm wounded, right? It's like there's a lot of tenderness in these places of sorrow because they have really lived outside of kindness and compassion and welcome, right? They're the parts that we have not allowed to come in because they were never welcomed. And the essence of this gate is that what we perceive as defective about ourselves, we also experience as a loss, right? As a sorrow. And most of us never really had the opportunity to mourn that, the loss. And then the third gate is really our main focus in this workshop. It's the sorrow of the world, right? It's the gate that opens when we register all the losses of the world around us, the daily diminishment of habitats, of species, of cultures, and they're all noted in our psyche. It's the loss of the wildland, right? It's the loss of sometimes even the disconnect with natural environments that some of us may feel. But this gate, it's not about the personal, it's about the shared and the communal grief. It really takes everything to deny the sorrows of the world. because we confront it everywhere. You confront it everywhere with the work that you do. Francis Weller says that this is the gate where we most directly experience the soul of the world. The place where we understand that we're not distinct and we are not separate. And then the fourth gate is a difficult one to grasp sometimes. It's what we expected and did not receive. It's one that's not talked about that often. And he says it's the, at the core of this type of grief, of this type of sorrow, is our longing to belong. And it's like the part of us that is waiting for the village to appear so we can fully acknowledge our sorrows, right? It's that profound feeling of lacking something, not because of like a personal failure or, but it's more because of a society that has failed to offer us what we were designed to expect as humans. And it can leave us with this feeling of flatness and the mundane and the shallowness. And then the fifth grade is ancestral grief, right? So the sources from all sorts of different histories, backgrounds, depending on who we are, what our social locations are, what our backgrounds are, right? So many of our ancestors, left their original homelands. There's migration. There's wanting to move, forced to be moved via slavery, servitude, right? The departure of the homelands that's oftentimes was so disruptive, especially to our psyche. And all that is like lives in us too. And there's a grief around the too that our bodies carry. And yes, our focus is going to be the third gate, the sorrows of the world, but I believe it to be really important to talk about all these gates, because we talk about a legacy of grief, and when we open one gate, they're all kind of open. Similar when we talk about the legacy of trauma, when we have a certain traumatic event, oftentimes we connect to all these other past experiences we had too. And grief does the same, right? We open one and all of a sudden all this other stuff is there too, that hasn't been attended to. And Weller says that grief is always there, right? So we kind of need to develop a relationship with it. And most of us inherited a grief culture where, our parents did not acknowledge grief. And so typically when that happens, it's like when grief shows up, you not just have a grief moment, you have like a grief panic moment, because you don't really know what to do with it. And he says, really, can we be with grief instead, right? Can we trust grief? And then also, can we separate out the trauma and the terror and the fear, so that all that you're feeling is just the purity of it, which is a very hard thing to do, I think. And then there's the thing that part of our identity, I think, is also embedded within the defense of grief, right? It's a core capacity. I talked about this last time, and a core faculty of being human, right? Like we are really good at defending against pain and experiencing pain. And so most of the time we try everything to not feel it. But I think something that's also important to remember is that when we're connected to our sorrow and when we connected to our grief, it is also brings us a state of aliveness. And the more we allow grief in, the more we also able to experience joy, that they are in a way on a spectrum, right? Because both of these are very big states of aliveness that are really important. And he says that you have to learn it or you're going to shut down, right? To be a full participant in this world, in this lifetime, we almost like have to open to all what life brings us. And he says like the soul came here for full participation. I like that. Something that I recently read, which I thought was really interesting, is that only the tears from grief are the ones that take toxins out of the body. So our grief tears are the only ones that cleanse us from the toxins inside. And yeah, grief is a natural response, right, to many losses. And let's look at the third gate specifically. And here are some things that we talked about last time. And so when we talk about loss, right, we talk about loss of all sorts of different things: loss of certainty, loss of financial security, loss of sense of place, faith in humanity or government, right, loss of dreams even, or loss of the idea of having children, or a sense of the future. And, you know, here are some that I mentioned last time, but yeah, it's like the equal grief. So the grief felt in relation to anticipated ecological losses, right? We could call it anticipatory grief too, knowing that it's going to come and you're already preparing yourself for it. We've read through these. I'm going to just leave them. I want to name disenfranchised grief is one that is like when your grieving doesn't fit in with the larger society's attitude about dealing with loss. So if you're talking about grieving, you know, the loss of a particular bird species, for example, and your direct environment not really mourning that with you. And again, it's just the feeling of, yeah, aloneness in that. And that's where disenfranchised grief comes in. And so you don't get any emotional support with it, because people are like, what are you talking about? This is not something that's, whatever they're saying. Let's see, what else do I want to say about this? So when we don't know what's truly lost or will be, how do we grieve those losses, right? Where do we begin? Where do we end? Right? It's a very different thing than when we lose a loved one, and there is, as painful as it is, there's an ending to that. But with climate grief, it's different. And because it's not, yes, there are concrete losses, but we are also in this very painful place of ambiguity with it. And so there's this concept called ambiguous loss, and it was coined by Dr. Pauline Boss in the 70s, but not actually until recently. People have been connecting it to climate change and the losses around climate change. And so ambiguous loss is the loss that occurs when, without significant likelihood of reaching emotional closure or clear understanding. And I want to show you how this may look like. So there are two different types. So one is the leaving without goodbye. And we see this familiar losses. We see, like, for example, soldiers who have gone absent without official leave, right? Or suicide, or even divorce. It's like you have a leaving, but you're not saying goodbye, right? There's a physical absence, but there's still a psychological presence to it. And so if we think about it in climate-related losses, it's like a missing person in natural disasters, right? Or the solastalgia, the loss of a beloved landscape, loss of lively ways. And then the other one is the goodbye without leaving, right? So there's a psychological absence with the physical presence. So we can see this familiar loss would be, if you have parents who go dement, right? They're there, but they're not there at the same time. Mental health stuff can do that. Depression, addiction, even preoccupation with work, right? When we get we're there, but we're not there, right? Or when we're even on our phones, when our kids try to get attention, we're doing this. It's a very confusing state, I think, to be in oftentimes. And if we apply that to climate-related losses, it's like a climate grief that never gets resolved, or even climate denial, right? Refusal to feel and act is part of it too. There's a physical presence of it, but psychologically, I cannot feel into that right now, right? So if I go into a state of denial or dissociation from our belonging to nature is another one, right? So these losses are all full with ambiguity. And while, some of them or most of them really cannot be resolved in a certain way, we can acknowledge them and we can talk to other people about them. So it's like with grief, almost what's asked of us is like, how big can we become and not turn away, right? Like, how can we actually say yes to it? How can we come into an apprenticeship with sorrow and walk alongside of it? And it's a hard and it's a prolonged practice. And I think it's a practice that's really important for all of us to engage with when there's time and when there's space, not all the time, but to carve out time for it. And to remind ourselves that we can do this in combination with gratitude of the beauty of the place that's there too, right? Last time I talked about if we turn towards beauty, it can ground us into the space, and then we can, and oftentimes it can then open us up to also allow ourselves to feel into the sorrows and of the world. So grief in a way really requires radical acceptance of what is, and it also requires self-compassion. And so Kristen Neff has done a lot of studies on self-compassion, and she's wonderful. I don't think I sent you a video, but there are a lot of videos out there where she talks about self-compassion. And she says that the quintessential question for self-compassion is, what do I need right now? And then what do I need to help alleviate my suffering? And the answer to these questions really depends on the circumstances. So sometimes she says that we need to accept ourselves and all of our human imperfections, to love ourselves and who we are. But that doesn't mean necessarily that we need to stay as we are in the moment, right? If a herd of cattle is stamping towards you, right? It's not the time for like self-acceptance, it's the time for action, right? Most people think of self-compassion as like soft and gentle. But self-compassion, I like the way how she talks about it, because she also says it can be very fierce as well as tender. And fierce self-compassion in a way is like, oh yeah, and I have this here on the slide too, but it's like acting in the world to alleviate suffering. That is also fierce self-compassion, right? Protecting and providing for others and for yourself, right? Standing tall and saying no, drawing boundaries, or fight for injustice. But the fierce self-compassion doesn't really exist alone, because it's not always the wisest for us to go into taking action right away, right? It needs to be balanced with self-compassion, with a tender self-compassion. And that involves like being with ourselves in an accepting way, comforting ourselves, reassuring ourselves, that we aren't alone, and being present with that pain. And she says that when we bring compassion, we can easily feel for, she says that the compassion that we can feel for others in their suffering, oftentimes it's hard to put onto ourselves, right? The compassion that we have for others, we don't really put that in ourselves. We oftentimes don't have that compassion with ourselves. And so it's always a good reminder when you think about your loved ones It's like, oh yeah, the compassion that I can feel with them, how about I'll apply them onto myself sometimes too. And that's a really hard practice, but it really entails, yeah, like putting your oxygen mask on first, which is going to be so essential with the work that we're all doing. Again, because we are in this for the long haul, right? So if we keep on being very self-critical with ourselves and we need to do more and I need to do more and I didn't write enough emails and I didn't send, this thing out and I didn't talk to this community member about this, that negative self-talk can get very can feel very demeaning over time, and it also feeds some like state of burnout in a way. So I know the word self-compassion for some people, they crunch when they hear it, but I want you to take this in. There's tender and then there's fierce self-compassion, and how do we move back and forth between those. So I'm going to stop share again. I want to see if there are any questions or comments that came up before we go into another activity. Just looking at the chat. Yes, we are. Yeah, I like that too. The reminder that grief is a part of aliveness like joy. Any other questions or comments right now in this moment? Marek.
Hi. The word you said.
Oh, you just muted yourself.
Sorry.
There you are.
The word that you said, the anticipatory grief.
Mm-hmm.
In our groups, it was something I mentioned that being born in the early 90s with all media exposing us to a dying planet and changing climate, disappearing species, it's like we were born right into that. We didn't get a chance to see what the world was like before. And I feel like all my life, it's just anticipatory grief. And I think that's a whole generation being affected by that in a massive world sorrow.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I'm glad to have heard those words. It feels very validating.
Thank you for bringing that in. I think it's really important to acknowledge that state, and that for so many generations, that's going to be their reality. And how can we find ourselves in community settings or in groups where we can talk about this together, and acknowledge that that's a hard state to be in. Yeah, thank you for bringing that in, Marek. John.
Thanks. Yeah, your comment about the stewardess, or saying put your oxygen mask on first, it makes me think about how we wait into a situation like in an airplane flying somewhere, realizing that it's a dangerous setting and it's like we're vulnerable to something. And the stewardess is warning us that if an event occurs, take care of yourself. But they're not telling us, don't get on this airplane.
Right.
And I get a little frustrated with trying to absorb grief that we are bringing on ourselves. And it's not anger. I don't want to elevate anger over grief. It's just that I feel like we're stuck and we're not really acting. And actions do speak louder than words. I mean, I think words ought to be driving us toward action and not acceptance of the state as it is.
Mm-hmm.
I think it's a failed state, and I don't think we want to live in a failed state. And it's like in climbing, failure is a way to gain courage. And they talk about it. It's not what you're supposed to be working toward, but you accept failure and you learn from your mistakes and you go through them. You work on beyond them. And what's beyond this notion of grief doesn't bring me energy. It's sort of debilitating, and I'm not complaining. I'm just expressing the feeling that I've been
Yeah. Yes, I appreciate your voice, John. Yes, I think a lot of people probably feel that. I think that there's also that cultural myth that if we are going to open that like floodgate of grief, then we can't really close it anymore, and it's going to prevent us from doing the work. You mentioned anger and sadness, right? Anger and grief, they're like siblings. They oftentimes come together because we the way how grief and sadness lives in us, I think sometimes when we don't have a space to express it, the easier it is oftentimes to express it through anger, right? Whether it's because we are being hurt more easily, depending on what our outlet is. But anger also comes because we care about something, right? And something actually feels painful. It's a reaction to some sort of longing that we have. We get angry about something and self-righteous about something because it doesn't feel good for us personally and societally and for the, all living species. And I think that, and that's why, because they are linked, it is important to lean into both of them at times. And I just want to say, don't fear that leaning into grief is going to paralyze us, but instead it may actually open ourselves up to more ways of navigating this world that we're in. And Joanna Macy, and part of why I would love for all of you to be in those 4 stages that we're doing, she says that when we open ourselves up to the pain, it's from this place that we're then getting even more connected with our collective existence, right? That it's not about privatizing our pain and staying alone in our grief and having that experience, but actually tapping into, especially to the 3rd gate, it is going to connect us with the wider world who also feels like that. And it's going to provide almost like a segue into seeing with new eyes and seeing things differently. But yeah, we'll talk about it way more too in the next 2 sessions. Sharon, I think, was next. Sharon, I think you muted.
I'm so sorry. One of the challenges for me, I think I've been living in kind of a despairing state of mind, and I appreciate the comments from the young woman that said since the 80s, she's been living with this reality. I'm 84 years old, and I feel like it's a relatively new thing for me, and it's because I had a great granddaughter that I concerned about mainly, but the tension is that I want to be realistic about the likelihood of extinction of humanity if we don't stop what we're doing. But I also have a desire to live the rest of my life in that tension, appreciating and having joy for the day. And that's what I have to do. Is, there are certain gifts that come to me, like when the sun comes up, and I live in Colorado where we've been having 70-some degree weather. It's just been beautiful. And I know that we could have a forest fire tomorrow. And I know that, trees are dying. And I know. So I want to be informed. I don't want to be in denial. And so I vacillate between extreme grief and what Joanna Macy says about starting with gratitude first. And I've been trying in my meditation to be more grateful every day in this mess, because it's a mess.
Real.
And I also, you know, I'm trying to do my small part in my church and with a creation care team and where I can do things, you know, and so, but I live in that tension, and I don't know that I'm doing it very well, but I'm trying.
I think all of us were trying. I think there's no perfect way
Yeah.
of dealing with this. And I think it's so important what you said, Sharon, about how complicated this is, and also how you know, I do want to live. I do want to live and go day by day. And I don't always just want to think about the world ending constantly. And I think that oh, sorry. Yeah. And I think that is part of the practice. And it's part of almost like widening. Suzanne, would you mind muting yourself? I'm just hearing some noises here. It's part of widening our window of tolerance. And because we widen our window of tolerance by actually letting ourselves move through some of these feelings and then come back, right? Like if you say in your meditation practice, like maybe you let yourself feel it. And then at the end, you come back to gratitude, and you're going to look up and you're going to see beauty around you. And in those practices, we are becoming more and more resilient. And I'm doing this because if you think about that window of tolerance I showed you, right, that's how we widen it. And so, and being able to sit with more does not mean that we are just can take in more information over and over and over. I think it's just that we can stay present and stay present with the stuff that's coming to us, and that we can maintain eye contact and maintain open to the world. And it's such a hard thing to do. And a big one in that is compassion practice. And a lot of different Buddhist practitioners talk about this, but if we can start practicing compassion for ourselves and then expanding it to our family members, but then also to people we don't like and our enemies and the suffering of the whole world, we are really stretching then our capacity to just be with all of what we are all anticipating, right? But I think all of us agree that we want to feel strong enough to be able to face all of that in a way that we can still enjoy life. And I think people in war zones have shown that. I've worked a lot with people in war zones, and there can be a tremendous amount of joy in there too, as devastating as it is, as scary as it is. And I think as humans, we have that capacity to do all of it. Yeah. So thank you, Sharon, for bringing this in. Paul, what do you have on your?
Thank you, Eva. I came into this series thinking that my main emotion is anger. I'm just incredibly angry. But this has helped open my eyes that there's a lot more going on. This is, as you said, incredibly complex. I see this, the grief is different than like losing a family member or the dissolution of an intimate relationship, or things that happen once in time. This grief is caused by events that happen with the news cycle. We're just inundated with it day after day after day. The death and the suffering of people in Maui and Libya and on and on and on. And it makes it really hard to deal with.
Very hard.
But I really appreciate what you're doing with us here. Thank you.
Yeah, you're welcome. Yeah, it's the uncertainty, right? There's so much uncertainty with this type of grief, the ambiguous loss, that our brain is just very overwhelmed in trying to make sense of it. We talked about this last time too, like oftentimes what we then try to do in order to make sense of it somehow is to try to fix it, or try to make it more concrete, or try to tell stories that are that provide a platform that we can actually grieve something in that moment, because grieving the world and grieving extinction, that's a very wide thing to think. It's almost impossible as humans, and I think that's why we struggle with it, and I think that's why oftentimes we defer to either dissociating from it, right, or getting really angry, or going into emotions that we feel more comfortable with, which is totally fine, right? It's all, these are all ways of just expressing what's happening for us. Okay, let's we have 30 minutes. Let's see. I think let's do it. Okay, I would love to do a breathing activity, and from there we're going to go straight into a connecting activity where I would ask most of you to have your cameras on, but you don't have to have your cameras on right now. This one is an activity that, well, it's really just a sitting meditation from Joanna Macy. It's very beautiful. It really helps us to move some of these feelings through. So if you would like to take your camera off for this, and I'm going to be reading from what I call the Bible, which is Coming Back to Life, which has all sorts of wonderful activities in it. So if you could turn off your, if you could mute yourself, that would be helpful. And then just lean back. If you want to, you can close your eyes, or you can look outside, or let's see, I'm just gonna, yeah. So this is called breathing through. Basic to most spiritual traditions, it is the recognition that we are not separate, isolated entities, but integral and organic parts of the vast web of life. We can open to the pain of the world in confidence that it can neither shatter nor isolate us, for we are not objects that can break. We are resilient patterns within a vaster web of knowing. Because we have been conditioned to view ourselves as separate, competitive, and thus fragile entities, we need to relearn this kind of resilience. One way is to practice simple openness, as in this exercise of breathing through, adapted from an ancient Buddhist meditation for developing compassion. Closing your eyes, focus attention on your breathing. Don't try to breathe any special way, slow or long. Just watch the breathing as it happens, in and out. And just note the accompanying sensations at the nostrils or upper lip, in the chest or abdomen. Stay passive and alert, like a cat by a mouse hole. As you watch the breath, note that it happens by itself, without your will, without you deciding each time to inhale or exhale. It's as though you're being breathed by life, just as everyone in this room, in this space, in this virtual space, in the city, in the planet, is being breathed by life, sustained in a vast, living, breathing web. Now visualize your breath as a stream or ribbon of air. See it flow up through your nose, down through your windpipe, into your lungs. And from your lungs, take it through your heart. And picture it flowing through your heart and out to reconnect with the larger web of life. Let the breath stream as it passes through you and through your heart appear as one loop within that vast web connecting you with it. And now open your awareness to the suffering that is present in the world. Drop for now all defenses and open to your knowledge of that suffering. Let it come as concretely as you can. Images of your fellow beings in pain and need, in fear and isolation, in prisons and hospitals and refugee camps. No need to strain for these images. They are present to you by virtue of our interbeing. Relax and just let them surface. The vast and countless hardships of our fellow humans and of our animal brothers and sisters as well, as they swim the seas and fly the air of this planet. And now breathe in the pain, like tiny rocks on the stream of air, up through your nose, down through your lungs and heart, and out again into the world net. You're asked to do nothing for now, but let it pass through your heart. Be sure that this stream flows through and out again. Don't hang on to the pain. Surrender it for now to the healing resources of life's vast web. We can say, let all sorrows ripen in me. We help them ripen by passing them through our hearts, making good, rich compost out of all that grief, so we can learn from it, enhancing our larger collective knowing. If no images or feelings arise, and there's only blankness, gray and numb, breathe that through also. That numbness is a very real part of our world. And if what surfaces is not the pain of other beings so much as your own personal suffering, breathe that through too. Your own anguish is an integral part of the grief of our world and arises with it. Should you feel an ache in the chest, a pressure in the rib cage, as if the heart would break, that is all right. Your heart is not an object that can break. But if it were, they say the heart that breaks open can hold the whole universe. Your heart is that large. Trust it. And keep breathing. And again, notice your feet on the ground. All the sensations that are going through your body. This breathing through practice, once we learn it, can be really useful in our daily life, right? Especially in situations that feel painful. To, let that ribbon go through us, taking in, breathing it in, and breathing it out. It's that flow. It's not sticky. It's flowing through us. And when we breathe through the bad news, rather than bracing ourselves against it, you know, it can, yeah, we can really let it strengthen our sense of belonging, our belonging in the larger web of being. It helps us to stay alert, to stay open, and also helps us to prevent burnout. Because it reminds us that both our pain and our power rises from our connection to each other. And so when we accept our world's pain really as the price of our caring, right? That's why we have this pain, because we care. It naturally flows into action, right? Without drama or self-righteousness, right? It's a straight line, a straight connection. So let's take another breath, and we're going to move into another activity. I'm going to ask you to put your cameras on if you feel comfortable, but stay muted. And I would like for you to pin someone. Pick a person who has their camera on, not me, because I'll be reading things. So pick someone who is just going to be there looking into the camera. And you can pin someone by hovering over the image. And then if you go to the 3 little dots and you click on it, and you can say pin. And then I would like for you to make this person big on your screen. So it's as if you're only sitting with that person. And maybe that person picks you too, or not. It doesn't really matter. So as many people as possible, please put your camera on so we have a lot of options to pin someone. And then this is an activity that's done in silence, and it's really just about connecting with another person. We do this I do this a lot in person, but this version totally works too. So look at the person in front of you. Look them in the eye. You know, make eye contact. And I just want to invite you that, you know, that a little discomfort is going to be okay. Actually, am I still sharing my slides? No. Okay, good. That a little, discomfort is okay. It's even useful sometimes, you know, painful realities of being on this planet, you know, sometimes means that we have to disconnect. And this is also the problem, right? That maybe reconnection is the part of the solution. Yeah, the solution of the great turning. So we're going to start with closing our eyes. And I want you to imagine that you are moving through a busy, busy city. And you're moving your body and you're walking and you have somewhere to be. Because, you know, we all have to get somewhere, and you know you do. So you're going to move really fast. You hurry, right? This is the industrial growth society, and time is money. And we need to get somewhere, and we feel a sense of busyness. You know, feel in your body that sense of importance, right? If you ever walked in New York City, right? Everybody people go walk into each other. Nobody cares, right? That's the energy I want you to embody right now. You're an important person, somewhere to be. You have people to see, things to do, people to call, money to make. And then notice whatever you notice, you know, feel the energy, maybe the discomfort, the frenzy in your body. And then start to slow down. And as you do, you know, notice your breath, notice your pace, and slow down even more. And then open your eyes. And let yourself register the presence of this person before you. Let yourself register this being. We do not pause like this. Here is someone alive on this planet at just this moment, born into the same time period of crisis, of danger, and speed. And they have chosen to be here today. Acknowledge the sheer presence of this other being and their choice to be here. Don't forget that there are plenty of other things they could be doing. There's plenty of work to be done, plenty of people to catch up with, plenty of tasks they have put aside to be here. And they've chosen to be here with us, with you, with an openness of mind and heart and willingness to see what might come out of this experience. To look together at what is happening to our world without even knowing what drew them here today. Feel your gladness that they made that choice. And then again, close your eyes. Check in with yourself. Take a deep breath. And imagine you keep on walking. And feel your feet on the ground, you're walking. And then you stop. And you open your eyes again. And here is someone now who is unafraid to love the gift of being alive. This gift has in some way led them here to this workshop. You may not know the story of how they came to be here, but you can rest assured that there is a story. Open your awareness to the strength and gifts this person can bring to the great turning. Maybe it's their patience, their love of adventure, their kindness, their knowledge, their organizing skills. Behold in this person the landscape that has shaped them, that imprinted their ancestors, and is revealed in this outer landscape of their being. Behold hundreds of acres of land which saw few human footprints, or the wild flowers and saplings bursting their way into being through the sideway cracks of a busy street. As you behold this being, let yourself take in the reality that they too are made up of the same minerals and elements of whatever wild places they hold dear and which hold them too. This living being in front of you was born from the same stardust which exploded all other beings into existence over 13 billion years ago. They are inseparable from all which exists, including you. Feel your sense of cosmic connection to this person and your gratitude for their presence in your life. And let them know with some gesture, whatever moves through you right now. And again, we close our eyes and connect with ourselves, our bodies. And take a deep breath. And again, we're going to open our eyes. And you're looking in the face of someone who has lived in the world and has seen and experienced things. Just by looking in this person's eyes, you may not be able to imagine what they have seen. This is a person who has experienced heartache, challenge, pain, doubt. whenever you know this person or not, whether you know this person or not, there are experiences that only this person knows. There is hardship that only this person has felt. You are also looking into the eyes of someone who has great courage and love. Someone who has a good clue of what is going on. The erratic weather patterns, the extinction of animals, the destruction of our planet. This person knows this is going on, yet they haven't closed their eyes, haven't turned away. Honor their courage, because it is only with these things that this person has been able to face the challenges of being alive. Experience your respect for this courage and love, and express that respect in any way that feels right for you. And then close your eyes again. Again, connect with yourself, with your body, with your breath, your feet on the ground, coming back to you. And then open your eyes again for our last one. Before you stands someone living in a beautiful, fragile, and poisoned planet. A planet with many unknowns. Someone who has chosen to be alive now and to be here doing this work in spite of the dangers and fear. Regardless of how this journey will unfold, you are in this together, working together, fighting together, training together, struggling together, transforming together. To be committed to the work that you do, to the work that is being in front of you, you must be willing to hold the possibility of catastrophe and failure and injury and hardship. Allow your awareness to open to the real possibility that this person will play a pivotal role in the great turning to a life-sustaining civilization. They have the gifts, the strength, the motivation. Allow that possibility to enter your mind and show your gratitude for this extraordinary being in front of you in whatever ways feels right. And then close your eyes one more time and just take a deep breath. And then notice your experience as we come back into the big group. And even just in 1 or 2 words, if there's anything that wants to be said about this experience, you can write it in the chat. Oh, I just lost my, where did you go? There you are, chat. I feel like I have a new friend. Oh my God, I love that. Brought me into the moment. Hope, powerful, moving. Yeah. Joanna Macy says that the present global and local realities strike us with greater impact when we relate to our face-to-face experience of another person. To confront their possible suffering and death can jolt our minds and hearts more than imagining our own. Right? So it's the power of witness. It really helps us to deprivatize our feelings. right? To harness the power of community. We actually don't feel alone. I wanted to quickly just talk about co-regulation, because all of our individual efforts really influence the collective. And the same way, like we're equally influenced by our social networks and by our community and by the systems that we're part of, because our thoughts and feelings and nervous systems are in constant communication, right? And as mammals, we co-regulate, like we send each other and signals and receive signals of safety. But it's not just the absence of danger that we actually communicate. It's also the connection between two or more nervous systems that feels nourishing and it feels regulating. And because it's like baked into our like evolutionary past, it's not just a desire, but it's an actual need that we have, right? It's something that's developed to facilitate survival. And it's a good thing to remind ourselves too that the strongest nervous system in the room normally wins. And what I mean by that is, I know this as a therapist, right? When I work a lot with trauma, and when I'm calm and collected, I can really support the other person in getting there too. Right? We know this as parents too with our children. When we stay calm and collected, eventually they are going to co-regulate with us. It can also happen the other way around, right? If somebody's very, very anxious, that also can take over. So in a way, again, our individual efforts really influence the collective, because we do have the power to regulate the community, regulate a room, just of how we show up. And so as humans, we are programmed to seek interpersonal connection, right? It's a primary source of resilience, and it protects us from social isolation, right? And it has shown to be detrimental to our mental and physical health. In trauma work, we actually know that it's not the event that happens to you is what actually traumatizes and creates trauma and eventually PTSD, but it's what comes right after. It's the feeling of aloneness. That's what creates trauma in our system, not the event, right? So if something happens and you are actually you actually just need one compassionate, attuned being at your side, and your brain can metabolize whatever is happening, as scary as it is. But it's when we are alone in those moments, when we're scared and we don't feel supported, that's when the trauma hits, right? That's when it gets like activated differently in our brain and stored differently in our brain. Yeah, so I am aware of time, and maybe I'll just pick it up next time too, so we can finish this together. But I just want to say that Francis Weller reminds us that grief is not a problem to be solved, but it's something that awaits our witnessing. And that's awaiting, again, for an adequate containment so we can feel heard and ultimately set it down, right? So grief and all these feelings are not meant for us to carry with us an entire life. Because grief doesn't want to be endured. It wants to be engaged, right? So if we're finding spaces for us where we can do that, it's going to be essential in the work. Whether it's the climate buddies that we talked about last time, whether it's here, whether you find a group, any of that would be really supportive. Thank you, everyone. I am going to, I'm going to do a closing, but I am also going to stay on for a little bit longer because I realized that I didn't give you enough time for questions at the end. So if you want to stay on, if you have questions, please stay on with me. But let's do our closing together. Okay. So if you could just again lean back for a moment. Close your eyes if you like. Just find a place within you that feels settled and anchored and on this beautiful planet. And we are dedicating this gathering today in recalling that our life resides within the living system of the universe and the energy that pervades all things. May all places be held sacred. May all species be cherished. May all injustices of oppression and devaluation be fully righted, remedied, and healed. May all wounds to forests, rivers, deserts, oceans, air, all wounds to Mother Earth be lovingly restored to bountiful health. This is a dedication of merit from the One Earth Sangha. Thank you for joining us today. And I'm sorry I've been keeping you a little over. But please stay if you have some questions. And thank you for joining us. This is, again, these are 4 stages we go to, and they make a lot of sense if we do them all. So I hope to see you next week. Are there any comments or questions? Oh, my heart feels so full. Mine does too. Thank you. More connected to community, holding so many emotions at once. Seeing the possibility of every person is a far better way to travel through the world. Yes, I do think that too. Feel connected to the wholeness. Oh, wonderful. Oh my God, so many. I'll have a chance to read through all of them. Yes, but any questions, comments? Otherwise, it's also late, so I am not offended if you need to go. Bye.